So a couple years ago, I was in the market for some used games, for some authentic cartridges that I wanted to buy. And as I was looking through them, one of the things that I noticed was that a lot of them, even if it wasn't made obvious immediately, were reproductions. They were cartridges that somebody made themselves or independently of from the original like studio or production, and just put the ROM on and sold them. So this is kind of interesting to me because it kind of adds a really interesting layer to a lot of the kind of emulation and piracy debate. So one of the big things about piracy is, well, if you pirate something and if people are pirating it, then it's taking money away from the company that actually produced it, right? So there's kind of some kind of theft going on here. There's loss of potential revenue. Now, when you're dealing with emulation, though, a lot of people, and I could probably bring up the Narrow video here, and it's a really good watch. I'll probably splice some footage in of that or something. When people emulate a game, a lot of the time it's not because people are unwilling to pay for it. It's simply because there isn't really a better way to do it, right? So, as an example here, I really like this game. It's called Conker's Bad Fur Day. It's one of my favorite games of all time. Now, you'll notice that in a lot of these listings, maybe not all of these listings, but you'll start to see, oh, this is authentic. See if there's another one, authentic, right? And, you could maybe look at it and say, oh yeah, see, the thing is frayed on it. So it's probably authentic. But the point is, this is extremely expensive. And not only that, but you need to have the original hardware, and you need to have a way to somehow hook it up to a display, which, if you're trying to hook it up to a gaming monitor, well, most gaming monitors don't have an RCA port, and your TV might have one, but there's probably a lot of delay, and it's probably going to look like garbage. Now, in this case, you can get this game on a new Xbox console through the online store as part of a collection. It isn't that expensive, right? But you then do need to have that hardware, right? Even if you already have the hardware, a lot of the time it's easier to just set up an emulator and play it that way. But this kind of thing has already been discussed a lot within the kind of game preservation community. But now there's this angle of, it's not that people are even just playing the game because it's the easiest way to do it. People are using the fact that people want to do it the right way and get a legit cartridge to basically take a pirated copy of the game and sell it on a reproduction cartridge. If you go back to like the early 2000s, right? People were selling ripped DVDs off of the street or to their friends as kind of a side hustle, right? Obviously illegal, but we're kind of entering that phase now with these cartridges. Part of this, I think, has to do with the fact that these things don't last forever. They are fundamentally scarce, and they are mainly preserved by people who collect them or like own a used game store and kind of try to keep these things alive as long as possible, right? They're basically collectors' items, right? At this point, they are almost in museum territory. But just through the natural laws of decay and the fact that these things aren't being produced anymore, over time, more of these things are going to break, more of them are going to get thrown away, and there's just going to be less and less of them available. So what exactly is the solution here? some people just like to play things on original hardware, right? The game was made to be played that way, and there are certain reasons why it might actually be preferable. The thing is, though, right, like, let's say Nintendo starts going after this. Is it reasonable to hold people accountable for buying a reproduction cartridge? Probably not. Is it reasonable to hold people accountable for selling reproduction cartridges? It would be very easy to shut that down and go after that. But at a certain point, you have to admit that these things are just becoming less and less available. And maybe people reproducing the cartridges themselves and selling them isn't really that big of a deal. However, it does kind of make it a nightmare if you're searching for this stuff and want to buy it as a collector, because you can never really be entirely sure anymore whether or not what you have is something that's actually legit, because there, at some point, and probably already are, people who are very good at recreating these things in a way that looks almost identical. Probably not a huge deal right now and for most of these things, but if you have some random game or whatever, like Earthbound or something, right, which is like, I don't even know how much Earthbound is right now. How much is Earthbound? Yeah, so Earthbound is just on its own still very expensive, still like, it looks like about $300 or something like that, right? Complete original with all the stuff, it's like $2,000, right? So if you wanted to try to artificially reproduce this, right, there could be a market for, let's try to make this, like, maybe you take some like cheap SNES game, you find a way to get Earthbound on it, modify it so it looks basically identical, and then get a label on it and sell it. And yeah, there's probably like serial numbers or whatever, but you could just figure out what a serial number is on a different cartridge and put it on that one. And then unless you have the two, and then prove that these two can't exist at the same time, then you don't really have a way of knowing anymore. So let me take kind of a look at this. So here's you can look up kind of ways to spot this kind of stuff, right? A lot of this is pretty sloppy. It's not super amazing, right? But you can see in this image, they're clearly quite different. This has this screw on it. This is a little bit just hard to spot, but there's sometimes some kind of like indent on it, or the PCB might be scratched or something like that, right? So there's ways that you can look for this kind of stuff. Like if you're running one of these businesses where you're kind of collecting this stuff and reselling it, right? You probably know or have people who are able to check this kind of stuff and give it the seal of this is authentic, right? This is real kind of approval. But the point is that it's kind of a hassle to do this. So here's a post on like the eBay forum, and we have somebody who's wants to sell some of their stuff, but they're worried because they don't know if the stuff they have is actually legit or not. It's like, how do I know? I don't want to be held, right? Like if you're a seller, you don't want to be held accountable because you accidentally sold something that was fake or pirated when you have no way of knowing. People are basically like, as long as you're not intentionally trying to scam people, you're probably going to be okay. Kind of a good general rule, maybe. I don't know. But ultimately, these things are pieces of history, right? They are things that are mass produced, right? It's not like this is a Van Gogh painting and it's the only one that he painted. It's not quite that scarce, but over time, these things are going to get more and more difficult to find. And so I just think it's kind of worth thinking about and speculating on how companies are going to respond to this, how the market's going to respond to this, and how this kind of affects the used game landscape. So I think that's about it for this one. See ya.